Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to KP. Annalise here. We are actually diving on into our Bible study because we were starting our Bible study and we started in Joseph. But Abba had me pivot and then he just said, okay, go ahead and pivot back. But what we're going to do is actually start in Ruth. And so we're looking at Ruth chapter 1. And the reason we're looking at this is because this the second chapter that we did for the story of Joseph with the coat of many colors. The second entry that we did, go back and watch that one. The second entry that we did actually folds into this as far as in Ruth chapter 1. So, or just Ruth in general, but we're going to, of course, start in chapter 1. So we're looking at that and we're just going to go ahead and break that down. I'm looking down at my notes and uh, my Bible here. So, okay. So we're looking at Ruth 1 and we're in verse 1. So it says, "And now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his two sons." So basically, you just have this man who's in the city of Bethlehem, Judah. He has one wife and two kids, so that's four of them, and they're all sojourn. They're all going from Bethlehem to the territory of Moab. And the name of the man was Elimelech. So now we know his name. His name is Elimelech. And the name of the wife, Naomi. So the name of the wife and the name of his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. But don't do me with the names now, because some of these names are like, what? How do you even say that? So Mahlon and then Chilion, they are Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her two sons. So they went on ahead. You got Elimelech, Naomi, Mahlon, Chilion. It's the four of them. They went from Bethlehem to Moab. And them going from Bethlehem to Moab, however that went, because it says, and they continued there. They came into the country of Moab and they continued there. In the space of, and they continued there, I'm just hearing, okay, they just began living life there, making a living, doing their thing. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. So there was all of a sudden, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and then she was left with Mahlon and Chilion. So, in them being left, now you just have the three of them. And then it says on verse 4, and they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled about 10 years. So this is in verse 4, you're getting that, of course, okay, Mahlon and Chilion are of marriage age. And so, them being of marriage age, they took wives that were of that territory, which means it's not of their nation. And so you got uh, one was named Orpah, and the other was named Ruth. So now you have Naomi with Mahlon and Ruth, and then Chilion with Orpah. So now you're at five. So then you have them basically dwelling together all 10 years. After that 10 years, it says we're in verse 5, and Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them, and the woman was left, of her two sons and her husband. So after 10 years, you have where Naomi, her son Mahlon and Chilion died. So now it's just her that's left. But she also has her daughters-in-law. So that's Orpah and Ruth. So technically you went from five to now three. And she arose with her daughters-in-law, and she might that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. So basically, um, did it say specifically? Yes. When you read verse 1, when you go back to verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land." So the reason they left Bethlehem, Judah, was because there was a famine in the land. It wasn't like, hey, let's just leave and go and live in another country. Excuse me. They were leaving because there was a famine in the land. So what she's hearing here in verse 6, where it says that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab, how the Lord had visited his people, giving them bread. So that means that she heard, being in Moab, that that the Lord had visited Bethlehem, Judah, and had basically um, reversed the famine. We're basically giving provision, giving that bread. So then you have, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her two daughters in law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. So she has, because she heard that, she's like, okay, now let's go. Excuse me. Now let's go back to Judah, Bethlehem, Judah. And Naomi said unto her two daughters in law, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. And so this part is where Abba is highlighting here, because when we got into, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I had to find my glasses. Can't see without my glasses. Okay. And so basically, okay, where we left off at was verse 8 in Ruth, for Ruth chapter 1, but this is reflecting as far as in um Ruth, excuse me, this is for Ruth chapter 1 verse 8. And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as he have dealt with the dead and with me. But Abba was pointing this out because when we were reading chapter 38, it was saying where okay, so we're in Genesis chapter 38 verse 11, and it said, then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son be grown, for he said, let lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So basically, what I was pointing out there is the space of how you see where Naomi is telling her daughters-in-law to go and return to their mother's house. And then over here where Judah is telling Tamar to return to her father's house. Either way, they're both telling their daughters-in-law to return to um, their family's home, because they're in a situation where their sons have died, or the husbands, which are their sons, Naomi's sons, and then Judah's sons, have died. So Abba was drawing that for you to see the parallel, because he was like, okay, that goes together, because you also see where later on Judah and Tamar, in that chapter, when we read this chapter, you have Judah and Tamar. They have the twins Pharez and Zara, and Pharez is the line that goes into the line with Naomi, as far as in Obed into Jesse into David into hang on one second. Okay, sorry about that. Phone acting weird. Anywho, so getting back to it, we were looking at, okay, the parallels as far as in the where Naomi was telling her daughters-in-law to basically go back to their mother's house, and then how Judah in Genesis chapter 38 was telling his daughter-in-law Tamar to go back to her father's house, and that was what you called. You see that being the parallel in it, because you have Judah that was with Tamar that had the twins Pharaz and Zara, and then Pharaz is the line that led to Obed, that led to Jesse, that led to David, which soon later down the line, if you know, as far as in the lineage goes, of Jesus comes from the lineage or the line of David. Um, and so this is where it's significant and just pointing out the parallel to it, where you see that the tribe of Israel being the promised seed, and then you see how that flows into Ruth. And so that's where he's pointing that out there. So just like, I'm sorry, ooh, I'm so excited. I get really excited when he draws these things together. And of course he's drawn this before, but it was just like, okay, in reading this, because he told me to start as far as in what I know, which is Joseph. That's my story. um and it's just like to see that, and then read it. When I say I've read Ruth so many times, I've read Ruth so many times. It's literally 4 chapters, super short. You could definitely go ahead and read it, and you could read it like literally in a few what you calls, but definitely take your time, just like we do here in the Bible study, to kind of just break it down and break each piece down, as far as in you realizing, recognizing who is what's happening and what the situation is, so you can really put yourself in their shoes, so to say, and in that perspective, so you can see. But in that space, we're moving on. So we're looking at Ruth chapter 1, and we're in verse 9 now. So the Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. So basically, she's telling them, go back to your mother's house so that you may find new husbands and find rest. Because in the space of, are we going there, Holy Spirit? Okay. He's basically just saying, real short, when it comes down to marriage, marriage is the first frontier when it comes down to kingdom, because that's where the family is built off of. When you're looking at a family, the foundation of the family is the marriage. So when it comes down to where he says, the Lord grant you that you may find rest, it just means in the space of where she's allowing them, say, each of you in the house of her husband, basically telling them, hey, go remarry, go find new husbands. In the space of going to find new husbands and whatnot, your husband is supposed to be that shield for you and that protection for you, in which case they, being that leader, being that protector, being that provider, they give you that space of rest as a wife. And then a wife, being the helpmate, gives the husband the rest and the protection and the guidance as the rib. So um just that little tidbit or that note there. But then you're moving on here. Then she kissed them and lifted up, and they lifted up their voice and wept. So basically she kissed them, basically saying goodbye, and they're just like boohoo crying now, like, oh my gosh, don't leave me. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. Because it's like, okay, with this dynamic here, they got along well. I want to say that, just in the space of them not wanting to leave each other and to be able to dwell with one another for 10 years. This wasn't 10 days, it wasn't 10 hours, it wasn't, just trying to get through the 10 days, or the even 10 the 10 weeks or anything, like it's 10 years. 10 years. So I want to say, they got along well. and especially for them to literally want to go with her, return with her, be with her. They're crying and they're weeping. You know, normally when you see the dynamic now being so dysfunctional, the mother-in-law not liking the daughter-in-law, and then yeah, we'll stick with that analogy because it's what we're on. So the mother-in-law usually not liking the daughter-in-law. Um, that is usually the dynamic nowadays, very dysfunctional, where it's like, okay, if we gotta part ways, it's like peace out, homie, like bye. It's not this space of like, oh, weeping and crying and whatnot. And this is where it's like the picture for me is like, okay, they really like each other. Not only that, they love each other. Like, okay. So moving on, we're in verse 11. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them all? Will you? This is where you get a little tongue twisted with the King James Version. You got to slow down a little bit. Would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. So Naomi feels like she's like been dealt a bad hand. She doesn't feel like, the Lord has looked kindly unto her, but in the way that she's been what you call or treated, she feels. Um because this is devastating to lose your husband and then to lose your two sons. Like this is like that's your family. Like to lose them, that's devastating. And anyone would feel like, okay, this space of like, why me? Anyone would feel that way. And especially if it's people that you genuinely love and it's not this dysfunctional or toxic type of thing that we see nowadays where it's like, okay, off with their head. Um, but just breaking that part down, and even with the parallel here, you see where Naomi is saying, turn again, my daughters, and she's basically saying, there's no more sons that I have in my womb, and that can be your husbands. And then she's saying, she's also too old to have a husband, because in that time, if you were like, I believe 60 and up, you were considered like, a widow or widower. No, a widow. Well, she's considered a widow, but at the you blah 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 blah. Don't quote me on that part. um as far as in like what they're called, but I do know it's actually a scripture. It's somewhere in New Testament. I believe it's like First Peter's or Corinthians or Ephesians, somewhere there is talking about how if you are younger than um if you're younger than 60, go ahead and remarry. But if you're 60, don't necessarily remarry. Hearken unto the Lord, and then hearken and cleave unto the Lord, and then teach the young women to be wives and to love their husbands and love their children. And so she's basically saying she's too old to have a husband, but even if she were to have a husband and bear sons immediately, are you going to wait for them to be grown in order for them to be your husband? And will you stay away from other potential husbands in order to wait for, them to be grown to have them as your husband? And drawing the parallels here, you have going back to Genesis 38 with verse 11, where Judah told Tamar, he said, uh, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son be grown. So basically, he in this instance is telling her to go home and to wait for the third son to be of age in order to marry him, where she's having to go home to her father's house and wait. Where Naomi in this instance is telling her daughters in law to go home to her mother's house, but to find new husbands and basically like move on. Um, and she's basically saying like it grieves me that y'all have had to like go through this. Um, so now we're at verse 14, and that's saying, and they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother in law, but Ruth clave unto her. So basically, Orpah was like, Orpah was giving a fight, but she won't giving up. Like, it wasn't a grit like I'm not gonna let you go till you bless me. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like, oh, she didn't shook me off, so it's like, okay, I guess you kind of make sense there. And she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law, because remember these were the help me, Holy Spirit. Thank you. These were the dot or women of Moab. So they were already of another country where they had their own laws, they had their own customs, they had their own gods, they had their own what you call. So Orpah returned to that, her customs, her God, her way of living, etc., etc. And this is what Naomi is saying to Ruth, like, hey, go back like your sister in law has done. And it says at verse 16, and Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. So this is the part where it's like, boom, like this is the what do you say, like the finale almost, um or really like the start to it all. But of course, like God is just that big that he's the beginning and the end. So it's like here's like the turning point, or like the that part in the movie where it's like, okay, everything just start to click, everything just start to change, everything just start to move. That's what's happening here, because as soon as she said, thy God my God, done dada, God heard that. God heard that, and he heard that as a vow. He heard that as a commitment. He heard that as a covenant. There she made covenant with God. It's one thing to know God through other people, as Ruth knowing Naomi's God because she dwelled with her. So of course you're understanding their God, you're understanding their customs, you're understanding their traditions, you're understanding that living with other people in that space like that. Because she's now, how do you say, even though she's a woman of Moab, she's also a woman who married someone who's of Bethlehem, Judah. So um, in marrying him, as far as in Bethlehem, Judah, from being Israel, Hebrew Israelite, you have uh, the customs of the you have the customs of the 12 tribes of Israel, and having those customs and the laws, as far as in the Bible, you have those laws. It's the space of her knowing what those laws are, that knowing who their God is, maybe not understanding them fully, but she has a general grasp of it, where you're in it in this space of you're knowing of it, but you don't necessarily have your own covenant with it. um I feel like we were talking about this before, but excuse me, just to not divert and sidetrack here. um it goes with it, but just to not, it's very different for you to know God through other people than to know God for yourself. So where she's saying, thy God be my God, that is a sign of covenant, that is a sign of commitment, that is a sign of decision, that she's decided to make God, excuse me, the most high God, her God. So that's like the turning point in the story here. So then it says, verse 17, where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. This is absolute commitment here. This is like real true covenant and commitment, especially for her to say that as far as in her mother-in-law. She loved her mother-in-law, and it looked like her mother-in-law loved her. Oh my gosh. Verse 18, when she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So Naomi's like, okay, she not giving up. She not about to sit here and leave or go anywhere. So I'ma just it's a mute point at this point. Verse 19. So they two went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them. And they said, is this Naomi? So basically they just continued on their journey, and then they went over to Bethlehem, returning to the land. Now you have everyone, it says all the city was moved about them, so everybody's basically surrounding them like, okay, hey, this Naomi, right? Like, oh, welcome back. Like, it's almost like a welcome party. That's how I'm envisioning it. Um and she said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Because Naomi was feeling like, okay, like like I had a husband, I had two sons, and I'm coming back and I have just a daughter-in-law. I don't have my husband, I don't have my two sons. My other daughter-in-law left. Like, what she doesn't feel very loved or dealt with very nicely here. And that's where we um get a little bit mixed up when it comes to what God will do and won't do, and all the things in the space of, hey, like, just because it doesn't feel good doesn't mean that God doesn't love you, because it says He has plans to grow you and to prosper you and not to harm you. He's not going to harm you. The way that you may see that it might be something that's harming, like that would be something that's like, bruh, what you mean? My husband and my two sons, like that would be like, that would seem like somebody's harming you, but there's a setup here and there's purpose here. And that's where His ways are above our ways and our thoughts are above our thoughts. And not to lean on our own understanding, because what we see as certain things is not it. Whether we understand it or not, whether we feel it or not, whether we think it or not, it's always going to be what thus saith the Lord. And so she's basically saying, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Lord have dealt bitterly with me. And so she says in verse 21, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? And then it says, um, right, because she's basically like, she's feeling afflicted, like, whoa, what's happening here? And so verse 22 says, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest. So basically you have the basically kind of like this welcome party. Hey, Naomi, Naomi. And she's like, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. I feel, afflicted. And I feel like, just my opinion, I feel like she kind of has the right to be, but at the same time, it's like what she thinks it is, it's not what it is. And so then you have them basically returning. So everybody understands that Naomi, she's returning. They're understanding that Elimelech is dead, Mahlon and Chilion are dead. They're understanding that Orpah has went back to her what you call, because they're understanding that Ruth is a Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, that has returned with her. So they're looking, hey, Naomi's come back. Her family's not there necessarily, as far as in the family she went out with, her husband and two sons, but she's coming back with a daughter-in-law. So, ooh, who's the daughter-in-law? And they're looking like, okay, the daughter-in-law, okay, that's Ruth. She's a Moabitess. That's the daughter-in-law. So, okay, they've returned from Moab, and they've now in Bethlehem. And then them being returning, what is crucial when you're reading and you're doing Bible study is also to pay attention to the little things, because the last line says for chapter 1, and we're in verse 22. The last line says, in the beginning of barley harvest. Peep that. The beginning of barley harvest. They didn't return in the fall. They didn't return in the excuse me. Yes, because okay. They didn't return in the fall. They didn't return in the winter. They didn't return in summer. They returned around spring, because barley harvest would be around that springtime where you're harvesting it, as of per research from before. Um, but the point being is they returned at a time and a point of harvest, a right time at the appointed time. They arrived at barley harvest, not where it was winter and everything was dead and everything was what you call. They've returned, and then not only did they return where there was once famine and there now there is bread, but they've also returned where that bread is a harvest now. So just peep that in that space there, as far as in going along with the entire story, and then just remember those spaces of the parallels being pointed out, of how Judah was telling Tamar to go back and actually wait, where Naomi was saying, "Hey, go back and find new husbands, unless you're like, you can't wait because I don't have." You know what I'm saying? So just point out those two parallels there. Um, Other than that, that's what we have for today as far as in the Bible study with Ruth, and going into that with chapter 1, just for you to find the parallels there. But yeah, definitely test the spirit by the spirit. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. God is love, and peace, love, and happiness here. I hope you guys have a great day. Do the thing, like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, bye.